after the committee made criminal referral for rebellion insurrection under 18 U.S.C. 2383, the conversation has now come up about disqualification from office. As it stands, and this is coming from somebody who hasn't really studied the Bill of Attainder, but it is simply put the understanding that you cannot really deprive somebody of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And trial by legislature or any sort of punishment imposed without due process of law or as prescribed under the Constitution, under the impeachment clause, would be violative of the Bill of Attainder, of this idea that taking some life, liberty, and the right to property away from an American or somebody appealing to an American court is violative of basic due process of law. And we have right to trial by jury. We have right to due process of law based on the Bill of Rights. So short of being indicted, prosecuted, and convicted of incitement under 18 U.S.C. 2383, the process for disqualification of Donald Trump from taking political office was the impeachment process. And despite the fact that 7 Republicans voted to convict Donald Trump at the trial, the impeachment trial in the Senate, it wasn't 2/3 vote that was needed. And on that, the GOP failed us because there was ample evidence there. Now, the only process that wouldn't violate our due process and thereby this thing called the Bill of Attainder is going through the trial process, going through the evidentiary process, going through the fact-finding process to see that Donald Trump did incite an insurrection and therefore he's disqualified from office. And there's been talk about what would be the enforcement mechanism of being charged and then convicted of 2383. It is a law that is written, and it says the punishment for this law is, I think, 5 years in prison, and disqualification, shall be disqualified. It's not sort of a discretion of the court at sentencing to say, no, okay, we're not going to include the disqualification aspect of it in my order. So whatever the actual prison sentence would be for the conviction of insurrection, the disqualification part of the punishment that's statutorily mandated would attach automatically to a court order of conviction at sentencing. So upon sentencing, when the judge signs that order, obviously he's going to appeal it, and I'm just sort of looking forward, and he's going to appeal, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. Whatever that happens, the facts remain, therefore the fact finding will remain, therefore the conviction will remain. And when the conviction remains, the sentencing guidelines, unless there's an abuse of discretion for the sentencing, which in the case of a mandatory stipulation in the statute, that disqualification is a requirement. They shall be disqualified, not may or can. The Supreme Court will abide by the statute, and therefore the disqualification will stick. And the enforcement of the disqualification will be if Donald Trump ever files for running for office, federal office, anywhere, then it would befall on the government to sue in the court in that jurisdiction and say, no, he cannot file for elected office because under this order by court, because of his conviction as a mandate, a statutorily mandated requirement of his conviction for insurrection, he cannot even file because he's disqualified from elected office. So the enforcement step of it would be when the order is issued, after it has been adjudicated and the appellate process has been exhausted on the charge of 18 U.S.C. 2383, that the DOJ will send out this order to every single Secretary of State in the country. And that will be on their record, and it will be on public notice as required by law. I think there's a period of time that you have to put it out in newspapers across the country. And it would become a matter of public knowledge, and it would be pinned on the boards of DOJs and courthouses, federal courthouses, and federal clerk's offices, and Secretary of State's offices all across the country till the end of time, or at least till Donald Trump croaks. So that's how you enforce the disqualification requirement and mandate in the statute. And short of that, the only sort of way for him to have been disqualified was through the impeachment process, and the GOP failed us there. Despite having 7 who were courageous, there weren't 8 more who would have come out and said, okay, or not 8, or I think like 10 more. It was a high number. It's a high number. But the number, the evidence is there. And I believe that the committee, by making the criminal referral for 2383, says that the evidence is there. The evidence that would be admitted into a court of law, and evidence that would have been sufficient for the GOP majority Senate to convict if they were looking at the facts, and if they were looking at the truth, and if they were defending the Constitution, which they did not. So at this point, the only way for disqualification is the process that I just explained.